Aloha and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss vertical agriculture technology, an important new way of farming. My name is Noel Morin. I'm a board member of Think Big, which stands for Think Big Island Green. We are a new Hawaii Island nonprofit working to improve our sustainability, equity, and resilience. We focus on renewable energy, waste management, parks and trails, education, and agriculture. We are hosting today's webinar to begin a public discussion on the merits of vertical farming for the Big Island and Hawaii in general. I'm joined today by fellow board members, starting with Tam Hunt, lead organizer for our event today. Tam is an attorney and author. He has extensive experience in renewable energy policy. He's also a board member for the Hawaii EV Association. We also have board member Jeanette Gurung, a forester who is also the director of the Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management, or WUCAN. That's a mouthful there. A Kona-based international organization working on gender equity and agriculture. Jeanette is establishing an agriculture innovation hub for women farmers on the Hamakua coast. And last but not least, we have board member Heather Kimball. Heather is Hawaii County Council member for District 1. She has a long background in climate policy and consulting. She's also working with a local ag hui, looking at opportunities for the Hamakua coast. Heather is our host for today, and with this, I'm going to turn it over to her. Heather?
Thank you, Noel. Noel, can you go ahead and spotlight me? You're the host now. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Noel, for the introduction. My name is Heather Kimball, and I am the Hawaii County Council member for District 1, which is on the Hamakua coast. It spans from the Wailuku River all the way up to Waimea and all the way out to Waipio Valley. I'm excited to host today's webinar and begin a much-needed conversation about food security, local agriculture, imported food, how that all impacts the climate picture, and how we can improve the quality of food here in Hawaii. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be moderating a Q&A session later today. And initially, we're going to begin with a panelist portion. We have several speakers. It's going to take about 45 minutes, but please stay on if you have questions for later in today's presentation. We will be wrapping up by 12:30. So let me go ahead and begin by introducing our panelists. Representative Nicole Lowen is a resident of Kailua Kona and has been serving as a state representative for the Big Island since 2012. She is chair of the House Energy and Environmental Protection Committee and has sponsored and passed a number of bills helping to improve Hawaii's environment and quality of life. Thank you for being here, Nicole.
Aloha, thank you.
Our next presenter today is Blair Richards with Sensei Ag. Blair entered the ag world as a seasonal employee for Charlie's Produce while studying at Washington State. Blair eventually became general manager of Rogue Co., a division of Charlie's that specializes in providing goods and services to Alaska. Upon relocating to Hawaii after working for D. Otani Produce, a family-run distribution company, Blair joined Sensei, where he's currently Director of Sales and Business Development for Hawaii. Thank you, Blair, for joining us today. Our next guest is Richard Ha. Many of you know him. Richard is a U.S. Army veteran and a 40-year commercial banana and hydroponic tomato farmer. He is also founder and president of Sustainable Energy Hawaii, a member of the Social Science Association, and serves on various boards and commissions around the state, in our county and state. Thank you, Richard, for being here. It's nice to have you. Nice to see you. And finally, let's welcome Kerry Kakazu, PhD. He is the owner and president of MetroGrow Hawaii, the first vertical farm in the state of Hawaii, founded in 2014. MetroGrow Hawaii grows lettuce, microgreens, other leafy greens for local restaurants and gourmet markets. It's located in Kaka'ako on Oahu, and the farm participates in the Honolulu Farmers Market with its mix of premium produce and value-added products. Thank you so much, Kerry, for being here with us today. All right, we will begin our conversation. Let's dive right in. We're going to invite Kerry from MetroGrow to kick us off. Kerry, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I guess I have some slides. Tam, am I going to control it, or will you?
Yeah, go ahead, Kerry, from your side.
Okay. Okay, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Noel, can you make Kerry the host? Or it might take Heather doing that.
Noel, just go ahead and.
Okay, I see. I'm the host now.
Okay, great.
Okay. Does everybody see that PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. As Heather mentioned, my name is Kerry Kakazu. I'm the owner and president of MetroGrow.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
MetroGrow Hawaii. We're the first vertical farm in Hawaii. As she mentioned, that we started selling in 2014. We actually started building our operation in 2013.
Here.
And
Just a reminder, everyone please mute
first commercial
yourselves.
sales in 2014. Okay. So as a topic today is a lot about our food self-sufficiency. I'll just start with this slide. As we all know, one of the big problems we have here in Hawaii, most of our food is imported. Statistics are kind of all over the place, but generally around 85% of our produce is imported. The other thing that, despite what everybody seems to think, at least from outside Hawaii, you have a great climate and wonderful growing conditions, but it is really challenging to grow produce traditionally in Hawaii. We have limited land area. We seem to be having more and more extreme weather events recently. Fresh water supply is something we don't always hear about, but I think it's going to be a big issue moving forward. Pest pressure, another one people kind of overlook, but because of our ideal growing conditions, we also have ideal conditions for pests. Chemical and biological contamination continues to be a concern. Here on Oahu, at least, its infrastructure for agriculture is really underdeveloped, so it's a big issue moving forward. And then because we are on an island, cost of supplies and equipment is always a big challenge here compared to many other locations. So one possible solution we are proposing is vertical farming, our topic for today. And just for those of you who may not be familiar, vertical farming is the cultivation of plants in a protected structure. So it could be a warehouse, as we see here. This is Arrow Farms, probably one of the largest vertical farms in the country. And greenhouses are technically also an example of protected agriculture, but usually greenhouses are more on a single layer, so maybe not quite vertical. But in a typical vertical farm, we grow multiple levels at very high density, and it's usually hydroponically, so without soil. The big advantage of doing this indoors is that we can control the environment of the growing operation. And another phrase you may hear in association with vertical farming is controlled environment agriculture. So it's a whole sort of subset or science field of study for growing things. So we can control all the environment for optimal plant growth. So usually that means it's going to be supplemental lighting, some totally 100% electric lighting, some a combination of both. We also have control over the temperature and humidity of the growing environment, dehumidifiers, air conditioning, and then we can also deliver precise amounts of nutrient and water. So again, everything is kind of contained within the environment, so there's really no runoff. Usually most of these operations are recirculating water and nutrients, so we can control that input and output also. Okay. What are some of the advantages of this type of farming? First of all, of course, we can get a high yield in a small amount of space. As you saw in that Arrow Farm example, They go up, maybe about I've seen 12, 14 racks high in a giant warehouse. So obviously you're going to get a lot more growing capacity in a small amount of space. The other thing that's an advantage is it's weather independent. We don't have to worry too much about storms and hopefully not too much about tornadoes, depending on how good our building is. But we're not climate sensitive. And with this control and weather independence, usually most vertical farms have very consistent production. So it's pretty predictable that, okay, we're going to have this temperature and this amount of water and this amount of light. So we can predict pretty accurately that we'll get this kind of yield. Now, it's still a biological system, so there's always some unpredictability, but a lot more probably predictable than a outdoor farm. Another big one I think is a real good advantage for vertical farming is very much less water consumption. And our own data and most farmers that are doing vertical farming say somewhere around 90% less water consumption than a traditional farm. So that's a tremendous amount of savings. And again, as we are always worried about fresh water here in Hawaii, I think that's going to be a big factor going forward. Our case, and in most vertical farms cases, we don't use any pesticides. So there's that less contamination and environmental damage. We can, again, contain the water and the nutrients, so we don't have the agricultural runoff that you would have in an outdoor situation. And the big one on a lot of our customers' minds is that we don't have contamination from rat lungworm and other kinds of that kind of contamination. So here's our farm, our sort of attempt at taking this vertical farming idea and implementing here in Hawaii. So we're located in this warehouse that you see on the top picture. It's right in the middle of Kakazu on Kauai House Street. And we're actually on the first floor of this 2-story building. And like I said, we've been doing commercial sales since 2014. We actually just moved into this building about a year and a half ago. And we started off in an 800 square foot second floor property actually in Kakazu. And so when we started looking for a larger space, my first thing was I'm never going to be on the second floor again. That was quite a challenge. Okay. We utilize aeroponic and hydroponic growing systems for our produce. And aeroponics, for those of you who may not be familiar, is instead of having the plants just sit in water all the time, we actually spray the roots with a mist of nutrients and water. As you can see in the lower picture, we have multi-level growing systems. Everything's on racks. And in the case of our new operation, they're on mobile racks, so we can actually move things around and really maximize the space. The operation, the plants all grow under a very energy efficient LED lighting, which I think was really sort of the big technological advance that made this even could be considered for growing plants economically. Previously, we would see 1,000-watt metal halide or sodium pressure lamps, and that electricity costs and the cooling costs would just be too tremendous. So LEDs and their efficiency really helped open up the idea that we could do this economically. We also have a pretty sophisticated and energy efficient HVAC system that helps us maintain the temperatures at a pretty cool level for most of our crops that prefer that temperature. So what do we grow? Our products, as we mentioned, we do this Salanova lettuce, which is a sort of smaller variety, but really designed to be good for a compact, very pretty and high quality leaves, very little core, so very little waste. So it's really a good product for restaurants. We also do a lot of microgreens. You can see here, I think that's our cilantro, and also some baby greens. And then we do pea and corn shoots, you can see here. And then our probably most unique crop right now is this ice plant down at the bottom right. It's actually a edible version of that ground cover you might see on golf courses. It's a succulent. It actually absorbs salt from the environment and keeps on growing. So we've adapted that for hydroponic systems. and it gives it a real nice salty and kind of crunchy taste. So what are the advantages? We mentioned some of the advantages of vertical farming. What do we think our advantages are as the first vertical farm in Hawaii? We've had now 7 years of experience researching and growing and delivering these products. So we have a pretty good idea of what's involved and what things are good, what things are not so good. I think our other big advantage is that we can do unique items. So rather than competing with our traditional farms and other methods, we're trying to grow that stuff that maybe is not easily available because it's too hot, or is like for our ice plant, for example, you can't really put salt on your fields. So since it's hydroponic, we can easily add salt to our plants. So that's kind of a niche we're in right now, is to do the really unique things. And that's why it appeals a lot to restaurants and chefs. The other thing nice is that we're kind of small and modular, so we can do pretty rapid new product development. And so if a chef says, oh, gee, I'm interested in getting this crop, we can get to it and sort of modify some of our growing systems to experiment with these new things. We're right in the middle of Kakazu, as I mentioned, so we get really good access to our restaurants and markets and consumers. One of the other big advantages you hear about vertical farming is you can put it almost anywhere. So you can locate your growing very close to the end user. So really cut down on transportation costs. And it works really to our advantage. Chefs call up all the time, gee, can I get this? We were in the North Shore or some fairly outside of Honolulu location. It'll be tough to get things to the chefs really quickly. The other thing that we're really focused on is to try and be as sustainable as possible. So, energy is a big cost here. So we have a photovoltaic system in our operation that really cuts down on our electricity use. We're water recycling. We even have a special filter to take our air conditioning wastewater and filter it to be able to reuse it on our operation. We're trying to use all kinds of safe sanitizing agents, from ozonated water to citric acid base, so we reduce chlorine and quaternary ammoniums and all those other fairly toxic chemicals. We've implemented a container reuse program for our microgreens, so customers can bring back the containers, we'll sterilize them, and then reuse them. And then, knowing this audience, I have to mention I do have an electric car that I deliver my produce in. It's just my own personal car, but again, it's at least a step in the right direction. Okay, so what are the obstacles for us right now in our production? High production costs, rent, energy, capital expenditures, maintenance costs. So it's still, I think, at our size and what we're doing, is still a more expensive way of growing. And it probably will be until you get to a certain scale and are able to reduce these things. Rent's actually our biggest cost. So I'm always saying, if somebody would just give me a building, I think we'd be okay. So that's a hard proposition. Like any other business, labor is a big expense. My own feeling, I haven't ever run a traditional farm, but I think we're actually probably a little bit less labor intensive than a traditional farm. So maybe it's some of it, what of an advantage for us. And right now for vertical farms, it's a limited crop selection is a big thing. It's really designed and focused on leafy greens and smaller plants with shorter life crop cycles. Things like fruiting plants, flowering plants, larger plants obviously would be challenging to grow economically. I mean, technically you could grow anything, but economically it's kind of tough to do things like large vine tomatoes, big fruiting crops. You can't obviously do trees, you can't do wheat or corn. So there's some limitation right now as to what we can produce. Okay. So how are we going to overcome some of these challenges? It's really kind of a simple equation. We can increase production, reduce expenses. So that's sort of our two attacks right now. So we're always looking at how can we get the higher density, how can we increase yield, how can we reduce the crop cycle time. So just get more produce in the same amount of space. And on the expense side, which I think is where we can get some quicker and really bigger returns, is things like using renewable energy, which we're already doing somewhat. Use more energy efficient equipment. Most vertical farms are really pushing the use of more automation to cut down on labor costs. And of course, always looking at how can we reuse and recycle what were our inputs so we can reduce that expense. Okay, so what do we think is our future and what we're trying to do moving forward? As I mentioned, 2,000 square feet, it's good size, but we're still a pretty small operation. And our niche, we realize, is restaurants, sort of high-end consumer products, value-added products. But we really are have an eye on how can we contribute to the food supply in Hawaii. So how can we apply this to commodity crop production? And I'm pretty, I think, convinced that we do have to modify our system somewhat to really reduce those expenses or increase the yields in order to do this economically. And so we're working again on continued tuning of the growing environment. How can we cool more efficiently, using crops that are now maybe bred specifically for vertical farms. A lot of research and companies are coming up that are doing that. We haven't implemented yet, which a lot of farmers can do, is to actually add more CO2 to the growing environment so the plants can grow faster. So those are on the production side. On the expense side, like I said, space and energy are sort of the low-hanging fruit that we can address right away to try and reduce our expenses. And again, for what we're doing now, Kakazu is great. But again, if we're doing more commodity food crops where maybe we're producing a big amount that will be transported, not too far, but somewhere, maybe looking for an abandoned building that can't be used for something else. Rail here on Oahu anyway, possibly along the rail line where maybe property can't be used for something else. Okay. More renewable energy. And things that I'm really looking at right now is how can we utilize sunlight? We're totally LED lighted now, but I'm trying to think that we must be able to bring in, since we have so much sunlight here, although we are using it for PV, how can we get it into our structure efficiently and utilize some of that sunlight to reduce our electrical costs? And then again, cooling strategies. Some plant or some growers in tropical climates actually use cool water for their roots, and that way cool instead of cooling the whole area. Okay. So I think, in conclusion, we really need to look at some of these alternative agriculture models to increase our self-sufficiency. We're not looking to replace any kind of traditional farming, but we just want to add to it. And I think, again, Hawaii people are now seeing more desire for local products. Pandemic has shown us we really need to have more local produce available. Now, again, we have this farm to school program, and the state just signed the law to say we need to grow more and produce or purchase more local produce. So I think vertical farming is ideal for institutional sales where you can have a predictable supply. And then, the other advantages are we're going to reserve some of our prime agricultural land for crops that we can't do in vertical farming. So again, thank you for learning about us. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And here's some contact information at the bottom.
Thank you so much, Kerry. And if you could pass the host back to me, Heather Kimball, that'd be great.
Okay.
And then we will go to our next speaker once we've dealt with this logistics. Blair, did you have slides as well?
Yes, I have a presentation I can share.
Okay. And let me just get you spotlighted and we'll be ready to go. All right, Blair, you're up. Take it away. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank Kerry for going first and participating in this. I actually had the chance to tour Kerry's facility. I think it's about 4 weeks ago now. He's doing great work down there at MetroGrow, and really appreciate him sharing and being a resource for us all to learn from. So thank you, Kerry. Oops. Okay, stop sharing my screen. To share. Let's go back here. Yes. There we go. We're back into presentation mode. So I'm Blair Richards. I'm currently the director of sales and business development for Sensei Ag. And I am grateful for the opportunity to engage with you guys and share a little bit about Sensei Ag today. So here is a little outline of my presentation. So I kind of want to start by introducing you guys to like the story of why Sensei exists and kind of the history of Sensei Ag. And then we'll go into talking about the people that make up Sensei, some of our products, some of our key partnerships, areas we look for growth, and some of our commitments. So first, a little bit about our history and why we're here. So Sensei was kind of founded through tragedy. And the tragedy brought together Dr. David Agus and Larry Ellison with the mission to improve health and well-being through data using technology and scientific research. So they founded Sensei Ag on the island of Lanai, and with the leadership of Mr. Ellison and Dr. Agus, you know, we look to have them guide us. Help us in design, develop, and deploy cutting-edge agricultural technologies to build a better, more stable food supply capable of feeding our entire world nutritionally relevant, delicious, and affordable meals. So really, it's quite a grand vision that they are trying to solve here in the food security of the world. Then we'll go to our leader. Our current leader of Sensei Ag is Sonia Lowe, who she is identifies as a farmer, a chef, and an investor. She is the only woman to serve as a CEO of a major vertical farming company. Sonia is currently living on the island of Lanai and enculturating herself to Lanai and Hawaii. I think this is a great quote from Sonia, kind of identifying her commitment and Sensei's place in agricultural technology. At Sensei Ag, we see the true potential of indoor farming. With the capabilities and guidance of our founders, we are integrating and deploying the world's best data in plant science, taste, texture, and nutrition, along with the most cutting-edge technologies to create the ubiquitous, affordable, and nutritionally relevant indoor farm of the future. So, I mean, she's really committed and really excited about our position and the future of indoor, or as Kerry identified, as controlled environment agriculture. So one of the fun things about Sensei Farms is we were started, our first farm is on Lanai. So all of our products are grown with Aloha, and we look to grow not just products, but people and partners. I think that's a really big part of our company, is identifying that the products are kind of the byproduct. We're really excited about the growth of people as well as products. So I wanted to share with you all Sensei's values, because these are the values that we measure against every day in everything that we're doing. And I think it will translate into showing you why we think we grow people and develop people as much as developing food products. So our people are our most important asset, and we want to be stewards of our craft. So we take responsibility for our corporate fiduciary, land, and process by which food grows, and we do it with integrity. We want to be transformational. We are pioneers for positive change in our industry. Through learning and collaborating, we will continue to grow. We want to be rigorous. So we want to engage the brain before taking action. We are accurate and thorough. We at Sensei want to get things done. So we are accountable and trusted to complete tasks, to act responsibly, and to open to receiving and providing direct feedback. So those are really critical values, but I think the last one is the most important one, and it's to remember to enjoy the journey. So, we have fun, we're collaborative, and we're aligned in our purpose and our mission. And being aligned with your purpose and mission make it really easy to make decisions that are in line with your business and your business's cultural values. So I think it's really important that this is the foundation in which our company and all of our decisions are made. What we do, Sensei Ag deploys innovative, agile growing systems that address food-related issues. Sensei Ag will take the learnings of its pilot farm on Lanai across the globe and bring hyper-local, nutrient-rich, affordable food to developed and emerging economies. How do we do that, right? Well, we use modular growing systems. So Sensei Ag uses modular components to ensure product quality and consistency both quickly and efficiently. We use tailored technologies. So that means that we implement technologies and grow plants based on the environment that's best suited for the crop. So for example, on Lanai, we have tremendous amounts of great natural wind and solar. So we use those elements to our advantage and to helping us in growing our plants in those environments. And then we also, we want to grow through strategic expansion. So Sensei Ag significantly reduces the time needed to build a large-scale indoor farm because we are modular and we can, build a system based on the environmental conditions to be up and producing much quicker than it would take to typically build out the entire infrastructure of an indoor farm. So some of our initiatives and why we do what we do. Sensei Ag is more sustainable, more efficient, and more nourishing than other traditional farming practices. And these are some of the reasons we identify as such. As a hydroponic farm, we do use a lot less water than traditional agriculture. We're not losing our water to evaporation. We're not watering the ground, right? We're delivering the water directly to the roots and preventing evaporation into the environment. We can produce because of spacing and how we grow through compact growing. We can produce a lot more product in the same square footage, in the same footprint, right? We don't have to space our crops out like you would in traditional outdoor farming, and we take advantage of the system to do that. And then a key factor for nutritional value is the distance traveled. If we can reduce the distance traveled and the time it takes to cover that distance, we're dramatically improving the nutritional value of that product that's reaching the table. And it's also rewarding and exciting to have harvest where you're neighbors feeding neighbors sort of situation. So some of these numbers, we took some of our stats from the University of California, Davis, but the idea is that by utilizing controlled environment, we can eliminate some of the pressures that make it difficult to produce agriculturally at scale in Hawaii and use the controlled environment settings to our advantage. So what does it mean? What are the benefits of hydroponic or controlled environment growing in Hawaii? And why does it matter? Well, to us, it means that there's an opportunity for the next generation of local farmers to be developed. And for us, we see that we can provide improved working conditions. So we're creating technology that's focused on making the life of the farmer better, right? And that means like physically less demanding than previous field-based work. Safety, reducing the exposure to the elements, chemicals, and harsh environments by creating a controlled environment and keeping people's safety in mind as they're doing their work. We want to be able to develop a more attractive career path in which there's room for everyone, no matter the background, to teach computer science and biology and being relatable, repeatable, and easier. We open the job for more individuals, in the hydroponic working environment. In developing the next generation of local farmers, we also are excited about the opportunity for career advancement. So not just entering the work field, but the ag sector is expanding and growing, and we're providing internships this summer hosted by the University of Hawaii students on Lanai. We're creating career paths, which once you learn the skills, once you have this understanding of plant biology and how growing systems work, you have a skill that you can take anywhere in the world. You have this global skill that can be applied to anywhere. And people are very forward thinking in Hawaii. So Hawaii is a great market to be experimenting and adapting these technologies as people here are willing and trying to adapt with technology over time. The third section here is decreased reliance on imports, which is just incredibly important for us. Locally grown food diminishes the need for mainland shipments and ensures availability of fresh food for the islands. Hyperlocal foods contribute to word-of-mouth businesses as well as partnerships with major retailers throughout the state, which we've been able to do. Another thing that's pretty important about this is just the location. So Lanai itself is very dependent on imported foods, and they only get a once-a-week barge service in from Young Brothers, and just 2 weeks ago that barge didn't make it into the port. So all of the food that was supposed to be brought into Lanai and distributed to the restaurants, hotels, and households had to be rescheduled and rerouted. So by being able to produce our own food and provide it on Lanai, we're really increasing our resilience and food security on the island. So for us to be able to step in and tell everybody that we had food available and products available to fill the markets and the hotels is pretty exciting. So I want to touch a little bit about the fact that our form factor and technology are kind of agnostic. So in that sense, we're pretty flexible, and we need to be flexible as technology and things are changing rapidly and the market changes pretty fast. New things are coming on the market, it seems like daily, but more likely weekly. And so for us to stay kind of flexible and being able to adapt to the new technology is really important for us. So in looking at some of these things, form factor, right? So we want to be able to leverage the best controlled environment, growing technology. So vertical farm, as Kerry mentioned, growing in a greenhouse or some combination of the two to reduce your inputs and produce the best products possible. So we think it's important to be flexible in our form factor. We think active research and development is critical. So, innovation and scientific teams are working to exploring, novel growing methods to increase yields, minimize resources, and maximize taste and nutrition. We want to be diverse in our locations. We want to be locally grown, but globally minded, making indoor agricultural affordable worldwide is one of our goals. And in the technology we use, we're unwed to a single process or system. So we want to use the most advanced tools available on the market. And being agnostic to the technology allows us to do such and test and trial and deploy products that maybe other systems wouldn't be able to do or test with because their system is built on one type of technology. I think a couple of things that are important to touch on here. It's more cost effective. It will be the bigger farms with the resources that will develop the algorithms and help the smaller farmers eventually benefit from this research, right? So, we have to work together. We have all different sizes and shapes of farms, but I think the idea that we want to encourage is the sharing of that information. Sensei, we're committed to a lot of things, and one of the things that we're most dedicated to is making a positive impact, right? For the community that we are operating and serve, as well as the world, right? Again, with that local focus and that global mindset. So Sensei Ag is committed to providing the highest quality innovations and products in the agriculture industry. As part of our unique value system, we will develop and integrate technology to overcome the barriers in supply chain that negatively impact human health. We will solve for chronic, costly, health-threatening challenges in farming, retail, consumer purchase decisions, and world health concerns. So I want to thank you for learning more about Sensei Ag today, and I look forward to taking questions and seeing what you guys all have to contribute.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for that presentation. Fascinating. And we'll have questions for you in a moment. A couple have come through in the chat. Folks, just a reminder, if you have questions for any of our presenters, we will be going to a Q&A session afterwards, moderated by Board Member Tam Hunt. So please make sure you're putting them in the chat as they come to you so you don't forget. Now it is my great pleasure to welcome Nicole Lowen, Representative Lowen. The floor is yours.
Aloha, thank you, Heather, and thanks so much for organizing this and to the great presentations and presenters that went before me. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I feel like my role here, I'm not an expert at all on vertical agriculture. My role here is more to provide the perspective of a policymaker and some of the things that we might think about. So I know Heather introduced me earlier, but just really briefly, my name is Nicole Lowen. I'm a state representative for the Hawaii House District 6, which includes Kailua Kona. I chair the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection, and I'm also relatively recently became a member of the Committee on Agriculture. So I've been learning more about that. And I think, there's a lot of reasons that the legislature and the population of Hawaii right now is really interested in discussions surrounding agriculture and alternative kinds of agriculture. That includes increasing resilience that's been brought up already. Hawaii imports anywhere from, we've heard numbers from 85 to 95% of our food supply. So in the event that we had a disaster that cut off harbors or airports, that could be potentially an issue in actually having enough food for the people of Hawaii to consume. I think the statistics are something like we have a 7-day supply, and that's it. And to reduce reliance on imports, of course. And currently, some other reasons are there's a lot of discussion around diversifying our economy away from tourism and about the agriculture sector being a sector that really shows a lot of opportunity for expansion in Hawaii. And then also, of course, climate change. Our imported food has a huge impact on the climate. Industrial farming has a huge impact on the climate. So insofar as we can do things differently by producing more locally and reduce our greenhouse gas, contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, then that fits into stated state policies as well. So, some of the upsides of that kind of covers, I think, what are some of the upsides of vertical agriculture for the island. And when I was invited to participate in this webinar, some of the points that brought up made me wonder if there was sort of this question, is vertical agriculture good for Hawaii or bad for Hawaii? And to me, I look at it as there's really room for all different kinds of agriculture. I don't think that it's a choice between vertical agriculture and traditional agriculture, organic agriculture. I mean, there's so much room for expansion of how much food we produce locally. And a lot of the way that vertical agriculture works would not be in direct competition with some of our more traditional farming practices, not in competition with the land they use or anything like that. Another possible advantage, I guess, besides what I've already mentioned, is that land use is a big issue in Hawaii, especially on Oahu. We already see some friction and competition about land use between renewable energy and agriculture, particularly on Oahu. And I think vertical agriculture, the idea of it provides an opportunity to incorporate agriculture into urban settings where we don't traditionally think of having agriculture. And I guess some questions, I mean, as a policymaker who doesn't know a lot about the technology, it's relatively new. I think it hasn't really been done like, broadly. It's kind of the start of a new conversation. I think some of the questions we've had has been somewhat covered, but, from our perspective, we probably want to dive in deeper. What are the environmental impacts? How are the nutrients that might be released from it handled? Because we already have incredible pressure on our reliefs from overload of nutrients. What is the profile of water use, which it sounds like is actually more efficient? And what is the profile of energy use, which it sounds like it may be a heavy energy user? And I guess that leads to the question, I mean, all those things come with different costs. Someone mentioned the cost of just the having a building to do it in was really expensive. So, in Hawaii, the cost of real estate is really expensive. The cost of electricity is really expensive. So those are two inputs that that a company looking to go into this would have to deal with. And I think there has been some discussion at the legislature. I believe in 2019, we passed a bill, directing the PUC to consider the utility to consider, I'd have to pull it up to get the exact language, but to consider preferential rates for protected agriculture. So I believe there's currently an open docket at the Public Utilities Commission considering that. So I think that's an interesting idea, but then we have to keep in mind that any preferential rates would be basically ratepayer subsidized, or any other kind of subsidy would be taxpayer subsidized. So we would want to see, projects that can stand on their own from an efficiency and a cost perspective. And that could be, you could incorporate considerations of the environmental impacts, the health impacts, all the job growth in the economy, those kind of impacts have some value too. So it may be that what is produced by a kind of farming that has higher cost inputs on one level pay for themselves on another level. But those are all questions as policymakers we want to have answers to. I think, another question, if you're looking at urban settings, is what kind of impacts does it have on neighboring properties? Is there bright lights at odd times of day? Is there odor, pests? Is there issues with pest control and things like that? Are all questions that will come up that I'm curious about the answers to. And then some other questions I would have, I think, as a policymaker are, because a lot of the talk surrounding agriculture right now relates to economic diversification, those questions would be, how many jobs would it provide? And would those jobs be able to be filled by local applicants? Would it be people imported from the mainland to come do those jobs? What kind of job skills would be required for those jobs, so that if this is something that is growing in the future, we can think about making sure that our students in schools and community colleges and universities are getting the right training. Because if we're doing, looking at this as an opportunity for economic diversification, we want those jobs to be available to people graduating from school in Hawaii who were born and raised here. We want that to be an option for them as well. Yeah, I think other questions would be, the food safety questions, all the normal regulatory questions that come up. And then, another big push is not just to produce food in Hawaii, but to produce food in Hawaii that will be consumed in Hawaii. And so that would be another question too. What is the business plan for these businesses that are proposing to come in? Is it for local consumption? Or is this a business designed to export a product from Hawaii? So I think I'll keep it brief and open to questions. And like I said, I'm not at all an expert. I've learned a ton just from listening to the prior presenters, and just here to offer a little bit different perspective. So thank you for including me in this today.
Thank you so much, Representative Lowen, again, for your time. We will go now to our last speaker, Richard Ha. And Richard, I hope that you can tell that we're passing it to you now.
Yeah.
We have some technical difficulties. All right.
Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you, Richard.
Oh,
Go
perfect.
ahead.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to wing it. Yeah. So the presenters previously covered all the things very well. So what I'm going to do is just give a brief history of who I am and what I'm talking about and why anybody should pay attention. First of all, I flunked out of school and I got drafted to Vietnam, and then I was there for 7 years. And then I thought, oh, I got to get out of the army, because you can't make your way without a college education. So I figured, okay, I better come back to school. So I went to UH Manoa, and I decided to major in accounting because I wanted to keep score. I didn't want to be in the the profession. I just wanted to keep score. And what I'm going to try to share is the kind of stuff that I learned that would be valuable to people listening. So when it comes to agriculture, we went all over the place. We started at Kapoho in bananas. Then we moved in closer to Hilo, and I'm speaking from the Big Island, yeah. So and we ended up on the east side of the Big Island where it rains a lot. So anyway, we moved from Kapoho where it's dry. We moved closer to Hilo, at shipment land in Kea'au, and then we moved to Tepeakeo, and we were always, in bananas. And the reason we chose Tepeakeo was because bananas need a lot of water, like 2.5 million gallons per year. So we look all over the place, considered all the possibilities, and we chose Tepeakeo because it rained, 3.5 million gallons of water a year, and it was free, and it was going to be free forever. So it was kind of a simple decision to make, yeah. So it was a lucky thing we did because we were still in Kea'au when we moved to Tepeakeo. So we had 2 different farms going. Then we got hit with a virus, and what we did was we shut that farm down, killed all the plants because we were surrounded by our friends, banana farmers, and we didn't want to have that be a burden on them. So we got rid of them. Then we moved to Tepeakeo. Then we were there for a while, and then the virus started moving across from Kea'au to Hilo, and then you could see it moving across. Then you jump across Wailuku River. Then it started moving up the coast, and the problem was this virus was spread by you couldn't control it once you got into the valleys. That was the problem. Once you got into the valleys, it was stuck there and you couldn't do anything about it. So we started looking around. Oh, okay. So we needed to diversify. So bananas was a crop that was a small volume. No, I'm sorry, small margin, large volume crop. And we thought let's diversify into something else that had different characteristics. And the characteristics we were looking for is something that was high margin, but and that's why we went into tomatoes. But so we had to go figure out how we were going to do this. So I went to this controlled environment ag courses. This is like about, holy shucks, 20 years ago, in Tucson, Arizona, and I learned a lot about controlled environment ag over there. So we started to experiment, and in the meantime, the banana farmers took a trip to Taiwan. And when we went to Taiwan, we realized that the water table wasn't very high. As a matter of fact, they plow the land, and on the hills, the plants would grow. On the bottom was the water table. And so that was interesting to know. But then we realized, what you saw in the videos, coconut water, so you drip the water in, but the way the thing works is the plants need a little bit, maybe 2 inches of air up on the top, and then the roots can go down. So that's what was happening in Taiwan, which we picked up. On the top of the hill was where the plants pick up the air. On the bottom was where they pick up the nutrients and stuff like that. So it was only that small little place that you needed the air. And so there are different ways of doing this. Like, for example, you get a 5-gallon bucket and you fill it all up with water and leave a small air gap. And if you could plant your plants there, you wouldn't have to do anything. You wouldn't have to even pump water or anything because you had the air gap. All you needed was the nutrients and stuff like that. So just hold that in the back of your mind, Then as we started to get into this, and we started to figure out, okay, we got to learn about this. Where can we go to see how to do this? So we went to England. And the reason we went to England is because England is dreary, like Hilo. So we figured, okay, so that's where we went. And what's really interesting, because when we went there, they had a different way of operating. They had tunnels, and they held the plastic down with ropes. And the reason they did that is because if a wind came up unexpectedly, All you have to do is run out there with your knife and cut all the ropes. Then the plastic would fly, and then after the winds settle down, you go back and your infrastructure is still there. Yeah. So, and the reason I wanted to talk at this time was because I realized that farming is tougher for farmers than it's ever been. When we first started, I realized now they were relatively easy. All you have to do is go figure out where you need it to be. Why is that? And the reason it's getting tougher is because as the world gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it goes by volume. So the volume makes the margins get slimmer, and that makes it tougher for those people that live in Hawaii where we're only producing on a small scale. So now, why that's scary is because we're at the end of the supply chain. Hawaii is like the canary in the coal mine. We only have 15% of our food. So we got to figure out how we're going to do this. So now if we're talking specifically about the Big Island, where several things come into play. One is we're not located in the city, where you can just grow your stuff and then right there is where you start selling, right in the city. And they do that in New York. They do them up on the top of the buildings, and then they supply the restaurants and stuff like that. But here on the Big Island, we've got a lot of land, but a lot of distance. So first of all, you gotta collect it and send it somewhere. If you send it to Oahu, then you sacrifice quality because on the barge, especially if you have leafy vegetables and stuff like that, you put it on the barge, you lose so many days of shelf life. So what do we do here on the Big Island? There's several things. Before I go any further, I wanted to say the biggest thing that helped me was when I went to a UH to accounting school. In a cost accounting class, I ran across this concept. It was called break-even analysis, and that is absolutely the most important thing that I ever did. Because that break-even analysis, you can categorize your costs and manipulate it and plan. And so once I got that knowledge, when I came back, I started running break-even analysis every week. And break-even analysis is a cash flow analysis, yeah. So we knew exactly where we were every single week. And so if we knew where we wanted to go, we knew how to maneuver this and that to get to the end. So we always had in our mind what was the end goal. And my talking here, the end goal is to try to figure out here on the Big Island, how do we help farmers? And I've been doing this after I retired, and I'm specifically doing this, and it comes down to a simple thing. It's about energy, and the first primary source of energy is food. And then now we look at oil, natural gas, fossil fuels, and we're starting to realize, holy smokes, there's a finite amount before we start going down the backside of the supply curve. The question now is, how much time do we have? It's a really important question. How much time do we have? Because the folks that I find very credible, having studied this for a long time now, is saying that in about 10 years, it's going to be really tough. And we've already passed the peak of world fossil fuel supplies. So okay, if that is the case, then what can we do? Well, you saw there the people growing stuff in indoors. One thing we could do here on the Big Island is combine, that you don't have to be big, but figure out where your market is. Yeah, maybe it's a market down the street with some supermarkets. But how about combining that with tree crops, with macadamia nuts, with cacao? Now all of a sudden you've got a more volume, but not only one product. Yeah. So just saying, yeah. So what happened to us was we decided that we needed to either uh, um, grow our business uh, or close the business because we already accomplished 20 years of success. Now, if we were to go another 20 years, how much would that cost? And could we pay it off? The answer was we could not. So we decided to close the farm. But it was okay to close the farm at that particular point because the economy was good. People could get jobs. It wasn't a problem. So, but then what came up was some folks down the cruise came by and asked me, "Hey, would you be interested in doing cannabis?" And I said, "Well, tell me about it." And so they gave me the what they had in mind, and I said, "Okay, what we got to do is first we got to ask the workers if I'd like for our workers to get first shot at the jobs, and second of all, the people in the neighborhood had to feel safe, and third, I had to have a real job and not just be a cardboard caricature on a stick." And so they made me CEO. So I committed to 4 years. At the end of the third year, they were doing fine. Everything was indoors. Crops were growing beautifully. They're doing a super good job. And then I was able to retire. So now I'm sitting here doing what I really need to do, which is try to help smaller farmers and get ourselves as food secure as we possibly can. And
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to
so
ask
where
you
do we go from there? It comes back to energy. So what kind of energy do we have here in Hawaii? We know we have wind, we know we have solar, but they're intermittent, yeah? But the big deal is we have geothermal. And here's the way to look at geothermal. It's gonna last 500,000 years to 1,000,000 years. We'll be sitting over the hotspot. And it acts like a battery, except you don't have to charge it. And you don't have to, imagine this, if you know, and the how. Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me summarize by saying this. Whenever anybody sees geothermal coming up and we need support for geothermal, help geothermal, I'll get going because it'll help all of us. That's critically important. So the rest of the stuff is you know, yeah, I think that's the big takeaway.
Thank you so much, Richard. I appreciate it, and I apologize for the technical difficulties we're having with you today. So now I'm going to pass the floor over to our board member from Think Big, Tam Hunt, and he is going to moderate our Q&A section. Tam, all yours.
Thanks, Heather.
Some great questions.
Great, yeah, thank you. A bunch of questions. Let me start with this one for Blair or Kerry. Beyond the reduction of transportation needs, what is the nutritional value of hydroponic greens versus traditionally grown greens?
Shall I go?
Go for it.
Okay. We haven't actually measured. I mean, a lot of people have been asking because we do a lot of microgreens. So we know the baby greens are definitely more nutrition packed than the mature greens. The hydroponic greens, I think on the whole, as we can tailor our nutrient mixtures for growing optimally, we can actually manipulate nutritional content. So in addition to transportation, not having to move it very far, we can actually work to optimize what the final nutritional content is by changing the fertilizer or nutrients that we provide the plant.
Thank you, Blair. Anything to add?
Just speak to that, you know, there's also ways that we influence or what we would call stress the plant to produce specific results that we're trying to get from the plant. So if we want, let's say more oil from a basil or something, there's things that we can do in the environment, in the growing pattern of the plant to generate those results. So yeah, using the environment and the nutritional and how we feed it and when we feed it and the The environmental controls definitely has an impact on the overall health of the plant, which has an impact on its nutritional, its ability to retain nutritional value.
Great, thank you. And a question for both of you again. Could you speak to how you feel food safety certification will affect your operation and growth?
Yes, food safety is not going away. So it's only getting more strict and more stringent. I think one of the benefits of the indoor vertical or hydroponic method is that, you know, we have to be super clean in our growing techniques because of our growing practices, and therefore our environment by itself is already a very clean environment to be operating in. So when it comes to food safety and following those rules and those protocols, those are things that are kind of already incorporated into how our business operates, because we're trying to make sure that we are, you know, utilizing every component and aspect, right? So when we go to seed, we want, you know, 95% or higher germination rates, right? And we want those successful transplants in every movement of the plant. And so I think those two factors are pretty important for us in indoor ag. Keeping a really clean environment is already in line with keeping food safe.
Yeah, I agree. You know, one of the advantages, I'm going through a food safety certification course right now, and I saw Lisa and Francesca were on here, so I have to say something nice about that process. But it is a lot of work. And the nice thing about vertical farming is, you know, one of the biggest things I see with the food safety is water quality, and that's a big issue. So where are you getting your water from? How is it transported? How are you keeping it safe? And, you know, for vertical farms, we use municipal water. So we kind of got a big head start there. And then there are a lot of questions about, are you keeping animals off the farm? And we have a pretty easy time of doing that. So I think a lot of things that are built into our systems that kind of keep us ahead of the game. The documentation part is definitely the biggest challenge for us. But again, you know, because we're indoors, we can kind of manage, okay, we know where this plant came from. It should be easier, I think, in the long run for vertical farms, indoor farms, to manage a lot of that information.
Thank you. And Nicole or Richard, anything to add on that? Okay, great. So next question, a couple of people asked about the same thing. And how do we, what do we need in terms of new incentives or, you know, policy changes to ensure that small businesses can take part in this new technology and not get pushed out by larger companies necessarily?
I guess as a smaller farmer, maybe I can address that. And you know, I don't want to sound flippant or anything, but I mean, the first thing that always pops into my head, if somebody gave me money, that would be the easiest thing. But you know, but seriously, it definitely is a really big barrier for entry, especially for indoor vertical farming, just because of the capital expenditures. So you know, yeah, I'm still addressing that. You know, I kind of bootstrap this thing with relatives and friends and family, and really, you know, haven't been able to expand it as much as I would like to, just because it is hard to generate. But you know, what I'm doing now with these presentations and all kinds of other things is trying to just generate the interest, show the possibilities, and hopefully, you know, get enough public policy backing and private equity backing or any kind of backing to show that, you know, we can contribute hopefully to more agriculture in Hawaii. The policy things Nicole mentioned about the solar rates, or the electrical rates. I'm actually the one that applied for it as soon as I heard about it, and I'm still waiting. So you know, it's a long process. I understand the arguments. You know, it's going to be subsidized by taxpayers. But again, you know, I think there are ways to regulate that, as you mentioned, you know, make sure it's for a business that's actually producing produce that will go into the local economy, which we are. You can put caps on it if you're worried about, you know, the cost of it. I think there's ways to regulate that to make it manageable. So I do understand the concerns. But again, I think, you know, like many other industries that are new, there are going to be some kind of subsidies or backing initially to show that this is possible. And as the economy of scale grows and increases, then hopefully these can stand on their own.
I'll chime in. We actually, the Department of Ag does provide small scale grants to farmers, and we actually increased it this year. I think it used to be 25,000. We increased it to 50 because of that number hadn't been updated since the 80s. And I'm actually not sure if that would apply to something like vertical farming, or if there's something we could look at to see if that kind of grant funding that's available for small farmers applies to some of these like newer technologies for agriculture. And then, yeah, as far as the electricity rates, I think, yeah, there has to be some kind of parameters on a cap or how long we allow it for, because I mean, it's not taxpayer subsidized, but it would be ratepayer subsidized. So essentially, everyone who pays an electric bill would be helping to subsidize a lower cost for this kind of agriculture. And I think that ultimately we want to help small farmers, we want to help local farmers, and we want to help incentivize innovation and new businesses. But then at the end of the day, over the long term, we want things to stand on their own and be a sustainable business model.
Thank you. Blair, anything to add, or Richard? Okay, so actually a similar question for Nicole. Do we need legislative or policy changes to enable vertical ag to a high degree and or to protect consumers?
I'm not sure. I'm not, especially I've met the state legislature, not the county. And I would think that some of the hitches could be in just some of where you would place it if it's in a more urban area, and, whether it's only allowed in industrial areas or like that would fall under like the county planning and zoning ordinances. So I'm not sure if there would need to be some kind of new legislation around that. So yeah, it's something for me to look into.
Thank you. And this may be kind of the $1 million question, but could Hawaii meet all of its imported food needs with vertical ag? And if so, how long would that take? And kind of how many facilities would we be looking at?
10. Oh.
See,
Can I
Blair
say
smiling
something?
over.
Can you hear?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what I started to say was try to get the farmers to grow different stuff so that they can get more volume. Because the way it is out on the outside island is we cannot get the volume unless we diversify. And the other thing is, if we wait long enough, we don't know how long that is, but if we wait long enough, we will have the advantage to the rest of the world because our cost of electricity from geothermal will not rise, while the fossil fuel will no question about it, rise. So I just wanted to throw that out. Yeah.
I think it's going to be tough for just vertical farming. As I mentioned, there's a pretty limited crop selection right now. So, we can produce lots of leafy greens, but you're not going to get tremendous amount of nutritional benefit from eating lettuce all the time. But again, there are the technologies there, and as we try and explore new crops, hopefully, that can be addressed. But I think in Hawaii anyway, just the amount of space and land and electricity that you need would make it pretty tough to do that economically.
And I would just add that I think one of the interesting things that we have to continue to explore and look at is these different form factors, right? There's a lot of different methods and different ways to try and protect crop and grow crops together, right? So also trying to find those crops that grow in symbiotic relationships are really beneficial to trying to grow high density crops. You can take the example of agroforestry, right? And how that food model works. But by having everything not organized and in rows and kind of chaotic, the chaotic scene actually, can be a benefit to fighting off pest disease and pressures like that.
That's interesting. And maybe drilling down a bit further on that issue for Kerry and Blair, if it is an economic issue that limits what kinds of crops could be grown, will that issue resolve itself over time? Or is it going to be an issue in perpetuity because of, for example, cheap agriculture from California or other places using traditional large volume techniques?
I mean, I think that it's something that we have to look at. I would say if we're dependent on crops from California, I would be nervous because California doesn't have water, right? It's the desertification is happening every day, right? They're taking more water than is being replaced in the water table. And so to me, I can't look at that as a real viable long-term solution and say, yeah, it's all right, we'll just keep pulling it from California because they can produce it with, as a commodity crop for less. So I think that, we have to look at it from the whole problem and not just treat symptoms of the problem.
Great. Yeah. So a few people have asked about carbon footprint and renewables. And I know both Kerry and Blair mentioned using renewables. What is the capacity to use renewables to really reduce their carbon footprint compared to traditional techniques, and particularly, like we just mentioned, imports from California, for example?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of those statistics, and I agree. I mean, I think right now, carbon footprint for us is going to be higher than a traditional farm. It's because of the energy cost. So incorporating solar energy, we said getting sunlight into the operation will all be ways that we can reduce that footprint. And the other thing I think we need to mention is that even though we have our carbon footprint, we're not polluting as much, and we're getting safer produce. We're keeping the land from being degraded by agricultural practices. So there are benefits that don't always come into the carbon footprint equation that need to be considered also.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kerry. And I would say that, depending on where we're farming, for Sensei, we're farming on land that, you wouldn't technically, it's an old cattle ranch, right? So we're growing on top of land that was once pineapple and then cattle. So we've taken this land that may not be able to produce food, in a regular traditional setting. And because we're growing it above ground in a hydroponic method, we're able to recapture that land and turn it into food producing land. And I think one of the other things, again, it's going to depend on every farm and every farm setup. But one of the unique things about Sensei on Lanai is that we're using the natural environment, like with as much sun as we can get and with the winds as much as possible. And most of our growing systems, all of our growing systems are run off of all the pumps, all the screens, all the motors, all the fans are run off of a solar installation. But again, that's possible due to a capital investment in the beginning to be able to run all of those.
Great. And a question for Kerry again. For your 2,000 square foot operation, could you share your energy consumption in terms of kilowatt hours on a daily or monthly basis?
Yeah, I saw that question come up, so I kind of went into my electricity bill and just to kind of do a quick calculation. So I'm estimating that, well, our HECO consumption is about 1,500 kilowatt hours per month. That's pretty high. And then my solar output, I was just checking for last month, was 3,178. So 8,000 something altogether, and about was that 1/3 to 40% from our solar array.
Great, thank you. Now, looking at workforce issues, obviously we'd like to see, as Nicole mentioned, local hires. Do we have people who are trained already, or is there a workforce development program through universities and colleges sufficient to meet the needs if we scale up on vertical ag in the coming years? That's a question for anyone.
Well, I'll just say at Sensei, one of the things that we're really excited about is the community engagement and the community participation at Sensei Farms. We've hired a lot of people from the community and continually look to find people within the community that are looking to, do something different, right? Doing something outside of the hospitality industry. And Sensei Farms on Lanai provides that opportunity. So we provide them training from day one. Before they're even allowed to go in the greenhouse, we put them through a food safety training educational program and things like that. So really we're pretty committed within our community, and we hope that we can continue to expand that into other counties in the state to get people excited about agriculture and show them the diversity of jobs that are available within agriculture that they may kind of relate to old traditional practices or plantation style agricultural practices, when we really want to show them that, using the hydroponic method. And, if you came by my Sensei farm or Kerry's farm, you would not see anybody bending over, pulling anything out of the ground. We're working on trays and tables and things like that. So just getting people exposed to what it is and the technology that's integrated into the systems, I think is an exciting turning point in agriculture. And we should really look to get, school programs and anybody excited and interested into participating with us.
Great. Now looking at one, oh, go ahead, Nicole. I see your hand raised.
Oh, sorry. I had a burning question. I guess maybe for Kerry or Blair. What's the profile of your energy use, like timing wise? Is it more at certain times of day?
Well, it's when the lights are on. So the nice thing about vertical farming, totally electric lighting, is we can turn the lights on anytime we want. So right now we have it on kind of a typical day cycle just because we're here, so we can look at the plants. But we can adjust that and move that to off hours. But here on Oahu, the use is actually higher in the evening. So that's when we can turn the lights off. We're about, I'd say 50% lighting, 50% cooling. Cooling unfortunately has to be on all the time. So you can't really adjust that. But the lighting can be moved to whenever we want.
Okay, thanks. That answered it.
So maybe our last question here. In terms of material inputs and sustainability, you mentioned different kind of media used to grow crops. Now, are these things locally producible? Are they sustainable? Or are we trading kind of one issue for another if we're going to really kind of ramp up vertical ag production?
Well, for us, our two main things are, we grow a lot aeroponically. So most of the roots are hanging in air and are being misted. But we do have a little rooting plug. Unfortunately, nobody makes that here. It's made out of coconut coir and peat moss. So it's actually compostable. So, that's actually when we sell the lettuce, we sell it with the root plug on. So people could compost it. I don't think it's industrial compostable. So it'd be tough to do it at home, but it can be in some ways used or composted if necessary. And then we also use a growing mat for our microgreens, which is also industrial compostable. So we were really conscious of that decision, in selecting our materials. Unfortunately, none of these things are made here in Hawaii, so shipping those things here is pretty big burden.
Originally, like the original material for like hydroponic growing was what was a spun granite called rock wool. That's kind of old technology now, and that's not very commonly used. I think some marijuana growers still use it because it's a good substrate. But all of our stuff is coconut coir. So thank goodness to all those people that drink all that wonderful coconut water. As a byproduct, we get our planting material and our base for our plants.
That's interesting. Thank you. So actually, last question here. Some LEDs are noisy, quote unquote, for ham radio users. Is that being considered at all in your production?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't heard that. I assume any kind of lighting, I guess, gives off some kind of radiation. If it's a time or a distance equation, I don't know how much they would emit and how far they would emit. So I hope it doesn't affect anything. But again, as they get more efficient, we have to use less LEDs. So hopefully that will also reduce the emissions that come off of it.
Great. Well, thanks everyone so much. Heather, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tam, for facilitating that session. And I just want to say again, mahalo to all of our fabulous speakers tonight, Kerry, Blair, Representative Lowen, and Mr. Ha. Thank you so much for all of your this great information about vertical farming. I learned a lot today. I didn't know a lot about this subject, so it was fascinating. I appreciate you helping us share this and begin the conversation with the wider public. And mahalo also to all of my fellow board members from Think Big for putting this together today. With that, we'll have everybody sign off. And again, have a great afternoon and Again, appreciate everybody being here. Ahui ho.
Okay.